Okay.
kind of
Hi,
fun.
everybody. Welcome into the Continual Comics Lair. I'm your host, Nancy Northcott. I'm the Continual Comics Lair director. And I'm delighted this evening to welcome Robert Venditti and Tim Board to discuss celebrating Hawkman. Robert Venditti is a New York Times bestselling author whose characters and concepts have been adapted for film and television. He has written the comic book series Superman, Man of Tomorrow, Justice League, Hawkman, Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps, Green Lantern and the Flash for DC Comics, X-O Manowar, Armor Hunters, Book of Death, and Wrath of the Eternal Warrior for Valiant Entertainment, and the children's novel series Miles Taylor and the Golden Cape for Simon & Schuster. He has also written the graphic novel adaptations of Rick Riordan's global best-selling book series Percy Jackson and the Olympians, and Disney's Descendants. His creator-owned works include The Surrogates, The Homeland Directive, and 6 Days, inspired by the story of his uncle's participation in D-Day. Originally from Jacksonville, Florida, Tim Board moved to Japan in 1991. He has been a comic, DC, and Hawkman fan since 1977, though he fell out of comics for a while in the 90s when he was struggling with the Japanese language. He gradually returned, although comics are very hard to find and expensive in Japan. In January 2016, he launched the Hawkman fan site Hawkworld. He has Hawkworld sites on Facebook with 5,200 members, Twitter with 6,800 members, and Instagram with 1,700 members, and his own Hawkworld blog on Google. He has also been busy collecting Hawkman since he was a kid and currently has about 500 comics, art, figurines, and other items related to Hawkman. Welcome, y'all.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Happy to be on.
Great. I love this book, so I'm really happy to be doing this evening.
Thank you so much.
Hawkman is one of those heroes who's been around for a long time, but he's mostly in group books. He very seldom gets to step to the forefront, but he never completely fades away the way some DC characters do. You know, they're kind of a flash in the pan and then we don't see him again for years. Why do you all think the character doesn't fade away? What do you see as his enduring appeal? Robert, do you want to start?
First, I'll say I apologize for the lighting in the woods. Hawkman never truly fade away. I guess. I mean, I don't know. For me, I can't really speak to like the long-term aspects of it because I wasn't reading comics growing up. When I came into comics and when I was at DC, I think he kind of was gone. You know, like the New 52 Savage Hawkman series had ended, and he had popped up, I think, in a JLA series, but certainly since the beginning of Rebirth for DC, he hadn't really been around all that much. He was kind of a character who would show up here and there, but he wasn't in sort of any stable series or anything. Why the character has endured as long as he has, which he's one of the oldest characters in all of comics, well, in all of superhero comics. I think that's just something about the ability to fly, you know, and I know obviously Superman does it and a lot of other characters do, but the winged flight aspect of the character is something that I think appeals to virtually anybody. I've always been an avid bird person, you know. I have nest boxes in my yard and, you know, I'm a bird watcher and, you know, I like birds of prey. And right here outside the window, there was a hawk nest this year at our cabin, and we saw the baby hawk like jump out and take his first flight and everything, you know. And so there's just something about that I think that is appealing to everyone in the same way that, you know, Flash runs fast. There's something just very innate about that. You know, when you're a kid, you run around with your wings out and you wish you could fly, you know. And so I think Hawkman is a character that taps into that in the way that characters with maybe more esoteric powers don't really tap into as much.
Okay. Tim, you've been a Hawkman fan for a very long time. What keeps you coming back to the character?
Well, you mentioned just a while ago that he's usually just in group comics. He doesn't usually have his own comic. And back in the 70s, I first really discovered Hawkman when I saw Neil Adams' picture of the Justice League on the back of a DC calendar. And there are like 7 or 8, maybe 9 DC heroes on the back cover in that picture, and Hawkman just stood out. Just the way his helmet and his wings and his harness, and he just he just looked different from all the other heroes, and he caught my attention. And then I started looking for him, and sure enough, he didn't have his own comic. I found him in Justice League, so I started reading Justice League. And it might have just ended as a passing fancy, but then I come to find out he has a partner, Hawk Girl. And back in the 70s, if my memory serves me right, a lot of the couples were always breaking up or fighting or just having all kinds of trouble. But with Hawkman and Hawkgirl, there was never any question about their devotion and partnership and what they were doing. And that really appealed to me a lot. And plus the fact that he was a alien from Thanagar, which I think is the coolest sounding planet name ever. So that's where it started for me. But like Robert said, his primary power, I think he symbolizes flight because of how he looks and everything. And if the writer and the artist do it right, and the recent series really did it, and how they show him flying and using his powers of flight in what he does, I think it has a really strong appeal to the readers.
Now, Robert, I saw an interview that said that you had not been really familiar with Hawkman before you started writing the book. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. But I mean, that's true of pretty much any comic book character. I think I said it a few minutes earlier, but I started reading comics in 2000 when I was already well into my 20s. And so sort of my touchstones for comic books when I was growing up wasn't comic books. It was the Richard Donner Superman films, or the Tim Burton Batman films, or the Hulk TV show, or things like that. I don't know why I never read comics growing up. I had a brother who did, and I was an avid reader. I read a lot of things. It makes no sense, literally, why I didn't read comics, because it seems like such an obvious thing that I would have been reading, but I wasn't. And so for a lot of characters, whether it's the stuff I did at Valiant, or even the stuff at DC, unless it's something like Superman, I really have no knowledge of the character. Even Green Lantern, which I know is a big, popular character. When they asked me, about writing Green Lantern, I said, he's green, and apparently there's a lantern that does something, but I don't know what. And other than that, I don't know anything. So I kind of guess the way that I always say it is, you can't fake stupid. And so if I had been reading comics all my life, I couldn't unlearn all that. You know what I mean? So when I come to a character and I literally knew nothing about, the only thing I knew about Hawkman when DC asked me to pitch Hawkman, he had a reputation for being the most confusing character in all of comics. And that appealed to me because I'm a very organized writer in the way I think about things. And that can definitely be constraining in some regards, but I'm very good at puzzles and putting pieces together, which is a good skill to have in shared universe comics, because there'll be a tie-in event or something that comes your way, and you have to figure out how to work with it in a way that doesn't feel like it interrupted your series and is organic and came, as part of the whole thing and whatever. And so it really appealed to me how confusing Hawkman's reputation was. And so I just started researching the character for my pitch. And it was within maybe the first hour of reading about Hawkman online. And there's even like several Wikipedia entries, I think. There's one for all of Hawkman, but there's one for just Carter Hall, and there's one for just Katar Hole. And it's like, so I was reading them and I was like, oh, I get it. He reincarnates across time and space, and the Thanagarian is the same guy as the Egyptian, and I'm going to get to that while I'm reading, and it's going to say that. I kind of understand the character. And I kept reading it like that never happened. Like nobody ever said that, and I was like, well, then I guess that's what my story is. Because if I can find a way to say that they reincarnated across time and space and make it all one mythology, and he's discovering that now in our series for the first time, then that really kind of fixes a lot of the confusing aspects of the series. But I don't know if I would have been able to make that connection if I'd read Hawkman my whole, childhood growing up and Carter Hall and Katar Hall were already two separate things, totally divorced in my thinking of the character. And that's what I mean about you can't fake stupid. Like I could never unlearn all of that to maybe see that connection and make that link, you know? So yeah, that's kind of how I happened upon, you know, my approach to the character and what we ultimately did in the series.
Well, that raises an interesting point, because I sort of depend on Tim for a longitudinal fan view because I come to it so recently as well. And so, as a longtime fan, all these different origin stories for Hawkman, how do you reconcile that, or do you, as you read the book?
Is that
How
for
do
me?
I, or how does Tim? Tim,
Okay.
Yeah, it's for Tim. How do you reconcile all these different origins, or do you, as you read the book over years?
Well, when I first started reading Hawkman, it wasn't really an issue. You know, Hawkman is Hawkman. I would see him sometimes at the Earth 2 Hawkman or the Earth 1 Hawkman. Um, and it really, you know, they both had the same appeal to me. So I really didn't think of it as a, I don't know, problem. But as we get into once the Hawkworld series happened, and then really threw things all over the place. Everybody started thinking, oh, this is confusing, and which Hawkman is real, and which one do you like? And I've done polls on Twitter and Facebook. You know, which do you like better? You know, the Carter Hall or the Katar Hall from Thanagar? Which one you like better? It's usually split down right down the middle. So, but I think both have, you know, they each have their own appeal. And Jeff Johns got it started where he figured out a way to combine the characters in a really, really cool way. And I think Robert picked that up and just made it, you know, all of the past Hawkman that we've seen in the comics in the past, they're all one guy who's just been living all these different lives. And instead of Hawkman being, you know, like a legacy or like an army or just different versions, he's just one man living just life after life after life. And he's accumulating all these different memories and experiences and knowledge and abilities. And that just makes him a fascinating character for me.
Well, you know, that also applies to Hawkwoman. I mean,
Exactly.
DC
Yeah.
fans like to say that Donna Troy's origin is a mess. Hawkwoman's origin is a bigger mess.
Yeah.
I was reading up a little bit on the background of it to get ready for this, and I did not realize there had been so many different incarnations of her.
Hmm.
And is it Shay era or Shy era?
I say Shea era, but I don't know. I've never heard it pronounced. I don't speak Thanagarian, so I've never heard it. I don't know how it's pronounced in the natural Thanagarian, but I say Shea era. So yeah.
Well, it looks like when he calls her Shay in the book, Shay would be Shay to rhyme with Trey rather than Shy.
Yeah,
The
I would
A
agree. I would agree.
So, Robert, when you brought her into the series, that wasn't for people who are not following along as the book came. She actually turned up in Justice League, and then she came to Hawkman. How did all of that work? What's the story behind that?
Well, my original pitch for the series, you know, the initial pitch document that I put together when they asked me to write Hawkman, she was in it from the first issue. And everything that you saw Carter Hall doing in that first year of the series, Brian Hitch were going to have Hawkwoman there the entire time, right next to him. And they would just make all these discoveries and do all these things together, you know. But as you say, you know, in a shared universe, characters can get used in other places, and you know, you don't always get to determine who's going to be in your book and who's not, you know. And it was likewise with Ray Palmer when I wanted to bring in the Atom. That has to go through a whole approval process. Can we use Ray Palmer here? Is Ray Palmer being used anywhere else? Does it conflict with continuity? Things like that. So because there are already plans to use Hawkgirl and Hawkwoman over in Justice League, we weren't able to use her in the series. I think she didn't show up until issue 19, I believe. But our intention was to always use her from the first issue. And I actually caught a little bit of flack for that. Like, I think some of the fans, I had some people actually accuse me of lying. Like, you don't really intend to use Hawkwoman. You're just saying that. You just want to write another book with just dudes in it or whatever. And I was just like, I don't know, I don't know what to say about that. You know what I mean? But it is what it is. But I would hope that whoever those people were, and I don't remember who they are, and it's fine. I don't get offended by any of it. The passionate fan base of comics is so much of what makes comics work. So I'm not begrudging any of it. And I could see from their perspective how they might think that way, But I would hope that once she showed up in the series, people realized he really did know what he was going to do with this character all along. It's evident. But I have no idea if they feel that way or not. So yeah, we wanted to use her from the first issue. Then we thought maybe we would be able to get her starting around 13. And a version of her does show up in the number 13 that we did, although we're not allowed to put like a point on it, but it wasn't until 19 that we were able to actually use her. And I was so happy that we did get a chance to make that happen, because to the extent that we were able to fix Hawkman's continuity and make it something that's accessible now, hopefully for readers that they can understand. He's just somebody who reincarnates across time and space. Hopefully they can understand that about Hawkwoman as well. And I wouldn't have felt like I had really done the job if Hawkwoman had kind of just been left dangling out of all this, And also to be able to bring in the romance aspect of the character that Tim was talking about earlier. Hawkman is just in his appearance, such a muscled, hairy-chested, hyper masculine character. To be able to bring in Hawkwoman and have that romance aspect that is also such an integral part of who this character has been historically, in addition to the warrior aspect. I'm so glad that we were able to do that. And there isn't a lot of romance in comics, I don't think, as much these days. And so it was very nice to be able to have that in the series and to be able to close it out the way that we did.
Well, and that kind of picks up on Tim's point that at one time, comic couples just couldn't be couples. That just didn't happen. You had Superman and Lois Lane, but you had Lana Lang off to the side, and every once in a while there'd be a story in Lois Lane about Lana coming between Superman and Lois. Mm-hmm. Aquaman and Mera had a pretty steady relationship for a long time. But I think the way you handled it kind of disproved the theory that you can't write an interesting comic book story about a married couple. And did you deliberately set out with that in mind, or is it just the way it evolved from the way you saw the characters?
No, we very much wanted to do that. Yeah, I mean, my touchstone work for the character, and some characters you can't do this, but with Hawkman, there's been a small enough number of issues that it's actually possible for you to read everything. You know what I mean? And Tim, before I ever met Tim, before anybody even knew I was the writer on the series, I went and Googled Hawkman, and I found Tim's website, and I found his complete checklist of all the issues, and I printed it out, and I used that to try to collect all of it, because a lot of them aren't available in collections. So I used them to try to collect a lot of it. And obviously I don't have all the Golden Age stuff, but everything from the Silver Age forward, I have and I've read, So Hawkwoman is always such an integral part of the character. And for me, my favorite Hawk story is the original Tim Truman Hawkworld miniseries. I just can't even imagine reading that series when it came out and it's just not completely blowing your mind. I mean, it's like Frank Miller's Ronin, it feels so ahead of its time. Even now when you read it, it feels ahead of its time, and it's been like 30 years or whatever, So Hawkwoman was so integral to that series that yeah, I definitely have plans for her along the way. And then as I read Hawkworld forward, and I saw how Shay was handled a lot of times. I can't remember the issue. Tim, you might, but I believe it was in the Hawkworld series. But Shay isn't even Hawkwoman anymore. She's like a detective in Detroit or something, and she goes busting into a room, just like guns blazing, and like rolling across the floor, like firing her gun or whatever, And it was just such a cool part of her character that like it really appealed to me that, and I think the Hawkworld miniseries by Tim did this as well with Hawkman. He was a very sort of brooding, thinking, not quick to action type of character. Amazing. And I very much tried to keep that aspect of the relationship because I felt it was it's not always portrayed that way. A lot of times in a lot of series, Hawkman is very much, comes in mace swinging or whatever. But I wanted to lean into the other aspect of it because I felt like that was more interesting character dynamic. And when she fights Hawkman in the first issue, where she shows up in the series in number 19 and she's fighting the evil version of him, she even says, whoever did this to you, they don't understand what makes you work. Like for you to just be some savage guy who fights all the time, that's easy. I can fight that and beat that all day long. What makes you scary is when you think about it. And so I love that sort of dynamic between the two of them. And, we kept it all the way up until the end of the series.
Tim, what for you makes that relationship particularly rewarding?
Well, I think my favorite version of them as a couple is what Robert just mentioned, the Qatar Hall and Sherathal in the Hawkworld series. And I think Robert might tell me I'm wrong in this, but when the series first started, and I had a couple of podcasts with them in the past, and I was reading interviews, and like you just said, that Hawkman is more of a thinker first, and Robert once said that he's not going to start a fight, but he's going to finish the fight. He's that kind of a guy. Yeah. And I thought that was the character that we had in Hawkworld. Because in the second volume by John Ostrander, we see him always hesitant to jump in and fight, and he kind of obeys what the ambassador from Thanagar or the police commissioner or whatever tells him to do. Meanwhile, Sherathal, she's kind of a hothead, and they're always going to hold her back, and keep her from doing something that they don't want her to do. And I thought Robert really tapped into these two characters for this series, and it really was maybe realized that more when the Hawkwoman actually showed up in the last part of the series, where we kind of saw a hesitant Hawkman at times, but she was like, just do it, and that combination of the characters where he's kind of the thinker and she's kind of the more forward moving character, I think that's what makes them work, and it makes them really, really interesting to read.
Yeah, I agree. It is what makes them work because they balance each other, right? Just like any relationship, Yeah. Any relationship, any marriage, whatever, there are the aspects that are different between you that balance each other out. And so there are times when you need a Hawkman to stop and think about it, and there are times when you need a Hawkwoman to just run in and crack somebody with a mace, and so if they were both the same, I don't think they'd be as effective, and I think that's what makes them, I'd put the two of them up against any other pairing in comics, I don't care what it is, Batman and Robin, or I don't know, whatever you want to say. I think the two of them together are about as tough as it gets.
That dynamic that you gave them in the last third of the series, I think it was perfect. It was just, I think it finally came together and what they are supposed to be, and it really worked. And It's a shame it ended where it did, because I was really ready for these two to just go off on more adventures and see what they do and everything. But I think you really establish what they are, and I hope the writers that come after you will pick up on that and keep it going, because that's what makes them most interesting, I think.
Well, in general, character dynamics, I think, add depth to a story. If characters have distinct personalities, that it's more engaging to readers. And so one of the things that really interested me about this series was Hawkman's friendships with the Atom and Adam Strange. And I was curious as to how Robert got the idea to use those two in the way that he did. And Tim, how that dynamic has worked for you over the years. So Robert, if you'll start, then we'll go to Tim.
Yeah, the Atom was a character I really wanted to use. You know, you're always trying to do something with the series, you know, especially something like Hawkman, which is a character that, you know, it's not Batman, it's not Superman, it doesn't have that, you know, it's going to be on the stands no matter what, every month after month after month, you know. You always want to try to do something to keep things moving forward. You want the arcs to be short. You want to bring in other characters when you can. You know, that's just kind of the nature of that. And so we tried to do that throughout, you know, our storylines. That first year, you know, can be considered as one long form 12 issue story, but you can definitely break that up into 4 issues and 2 issues and 4 issues, and each one is even self-contained, because just about in every issue for the first year they go to a different place, and then the next issue they go somewhere else, you know. And so I wanted to do something around 5 and 6 to bring a character into the series that would change things up and you know, I don't know, put something exciting into it or whatever. And I wanted to use Ray Palmer just because I always thought Ray Palmer was cool, but I also thought Ray Palmer's a character who's kind of underserved as well. Like, he's kind of thought of as a joke, I think, a lot because he shrinks and like big whoop-de-doo, you know. I think Ray Palmer's a very cool character. And so the idea to put him in the microverse, you know, it allowed Brian Hitch and I to really do something with Hawkman that was staying true to what we were doing. You know, if he reincarnates across time and space, and we're creating all of these other, you know, past lives and things, which is, you know, Brian and I built all this stuff together for that first year. The microverse would be an interesting place, and we wanted to send them to places that were unique to the DCU, right? We didn't want to go to like London and you know, Australia or whatever, right? We wanted to go to Dinosaur Island and Thanagar and the microverse and Krypton and like things like, you know, really, really, as I always say, make Hawkman the living historical document of the DCU. Been to all these different places, which is something no other character can say. And so to go to the microverse and to have that adventure there, my first thought was, if we do this, then we can do something with Ray that we haven't really seen as much of, and invert that traditional, you know, Adam and Hawkman pairing that we had seen going all the way back to the Silver Age with these two, which were some of my very favorite stories from the Silver Age. Some of my very favorite covers were when the Hawkman series became the Adam and Hawkman, and they were together. I just love those stories to death. And so to do in the microverse, now we can make it so that Ray Palmer could unshrink himself in the microverse just the tiniest fraction and become a giant. And now he's the big guy and Hawkman's the little guy, you know? And so to be able to flip that, as soon as that occurred to me, I was like, we have to do that. And Brian Hitch draws, anybody who remembers his Ultimate run, that he did over at Marvel, he draws giant characters so amazing, you know? And so when I was typing up that series, I think probably the most fun I had writing, and I had fun writing all of it, but the part where I was just absolutely giddy was that two-parter with Ray Palmer, knowing that Ray Palmer was going to be the giant and Hawkman was going to be little, and just waiting to see Brian draw it. And that spread he drew of Ray Palmer as a giant is just like the coolest thing ever. So it was something we really wanted to do to bring into the series. And same with Adam Strange, you know, as much as Ray Palmer is sort of a very grounded character, you know, he's a college professor, he's a physicist, all these things. Adam Strange is obviously a very cosmic character. And so I wasn't quite as sure how I was going to bring Adam Strange into the series. I knew I wanted to, but once we got into the storyline that we were doing, uh, where now, you know, Sky Tyrant was there and things like that. I knew that we could bring in Adam Strange and kind of add the archaeology aspect to the team that was now lacking because Hawkman was a villain, you know, in quotes. And so that was the way to bring in Adam Strange. So I don't know. Tim put together this awesome collage that he did, and he released on social media. That's all stuff from the series, you know. And when I looked at it, it was like I cannot believe we did that much stuff in 20, you know. And so I don't really know. There's certainly other stories that we could have done, and I had plenty more things that I could do. And sort of original pie in the sky plan was to hopefully make it to like 40 issues, you know. Um, but I don't think I really left anything on the table, you know. Like, there's Hawkwoman. We got in half set, you know. I mean, we got so much stuff. We got in the JSA, you know what I mean. And I just don't know what else. I don't feel like we left anything on the table. And if I hadn't done Ray Palmer or Adam Strange, I would have felt we should have done Ray Palmer or Adam Strange. You know, so.
So Tim, how do you see those friendships going back through the years?
Yeah, the Hawkman Adam friendship has always been interesting because they're just like completely different. Hawkman just like this barbaric character, you know, who's swinging around a mace, and then there's this tiny Adam who's kind of more, you know, fights with his intelligence and everything. And but I put together their history and all the times that they've appeared together in an article from my blog. And I think every writer who's ever handled them just writes them as completely comfortable and sure of each other's friendship with each other. And it's always kind of reassuring to see that, because that's one of the best friendships in DC Comics, I think. There was an Adams Giant special, I think back in 2011, where we find out that Ray Palmer had an older brother who was a fireman who died in a fire. And he was a lot like Carter Hall, Hawkman. And after his brother died, Hawkman shows up, and he kind of, it's not like a big brother relationship, but he kind of sees his brother in Hawkman. And that's one of the things that makes their friendship work, I think. But definitely one of the best and most interesting friendships in DC Comics, I think. As far as for Adam Strange, I've never really felt like a really strong friendship between these two. They've kind of been like thrown together because of their planets always at war. Almost every series that they're in together, they're thrown together because of circumstances. But they work out well together because Adam Strange is more of a kind of science guy again, and they're both archaeologists, so they have that connection. And I think Gardner Fox's favorite character was actually Adam Strange, and then second was Hawkman. I think I read that before. So that's and they always have their planets going at war with each other. So that's always that interesting dynamic. But the one more thing that Robert did in the series was establish a friendship with the Shade. And I thought that was really interesting, and how Hawkman saw good in the Shade, and how he gave him the cane with the hawk head on top. And I really would have liked to seen that friendship established more. And I hope we do get to see that in the future. So I think Hawkman and his friendship, when he makes a friend, it's for life. He is loyal to his friends. I think you can see that by his relationship with Adam and Adam Strange. And one of the best panels in the whole series was when Cher was said, Adam, and they both, and Adam and Adam Strange are both there, and they say, yeah, and she's like, which Adam, one with the T or one with the D? You know, that was one of the best panels in the whole series. I was glad Robert did that. That was really fun.
Well, actually, that the remembering the shade kind of makes me wonder what the inspiration for that was.
For me, when I was new to comics and I was, starting to read them and just imagine how much stuff is out there, I don't remember why, but I started reading the James Robinson Starman run, and the Shade was a character in the Starman run. And ever since that, this would have been like probably 2002 that I was reading those. And ever since then, I thought the Shade was always just a really cool character. And I remembered that he had the cane with the bird head on it. So when DC was going to do You're the Villain, and they sort of, I don't want to say assigned, but they kind of gave you prompts, I guess, for lack of a better word. You're the villain. The book's going to be taken over, and for Hawkman, it's going to be Shadow Thief. Which was cool because Shadow Thief was something I wanted to get to. Because as far as rogues go, I would say Shadow Thief and Gentleman Ghost are probably the two that appeal to me the most out of Hawkman's gallery. And so once it was going to be Shadow Thief, I thought, well, here's an opportunity to bring in the Shade because we're dealing with shadows and things like that. And I was so happy to be able to do that. And like Tim said, establish that relationship for these two characters because it makes sense to me. They're both immortal. Hawkman's been around a lot longer, but I'm sure he would love it to have a friend that wasn't going to die in 40 years later of old age, and have this friend that could kind of go with him throughout history. And so that would appeal to him with the Shade. And also I always like that sort of history of the Shade as a villain, but in James Robinson's series sort of come back to be a sort of a anti-villain, I guess you would say, in the way that there's anti-heroes or something. And so he still had this dark aspects to him, but he was trying to do the right thing. And so why would he be that way? And I thought it would be cool to make Hawkman a part of that mythology. And it was also just a constant focus on how much I could connect Hawkman to everything else in the DCU, because I really wanted that historical document of the DCU idea to take hold. And so where I could create my own characters and bring them in and make some immortal character that was friends with Hawkman, to me, for this series in particular, it was much more appealing to connect him to Madame Xanadu, or to connect him to the Shade, and to connect him to Krypton, and to connect him to New Genesis and the Microverse and all of these things, because that's how I was going to be able to really make him that historical document of the DC universe.
Well, speaking of history, what inspired the plague sequences in the story?
Yeah, really, really bizarre, right? Because I wrote that whole script before there was the pandemic that we're all going through, I was at a convention with my son, who is 12, and he bought a like a plague doctor mask at a booth, because he thought it looked cool, and he put it on, and I was like, that'd be a cool idea for Hawkman if he was a plague doctor in some life, And so it was an idea that because in every series you have to have these issues that can come in and kind of give the artist a chance to catch up, because it's easy to write a comic every month. It is grueling to draw a comic book every month, And so baked into the concept of Hawkman, I thought Jeff Johns did this really well. Was all of a sudden you'd have an issue about Nighthawk and Cinnamon or whatever, you know what I mean? So I very much wanted to do that too. And we did that with issue 13. And by the time 23 came around, I think it was 23, it was time for the artist to need to catch up in the schedule a little bit. And it was just an idea I had, like, okay, Plague Doctor, And so I have a dozen of those ideas that we could have done whenever we needed them. But the Plague Doctor one just felt like it would be a cool one to do, because I'm all about trying to write characters when you can for an issue where they, if I was to ever write an issue of Wolverine, he would never use his claws in the whole issue. You know what I mean? Like it's always interesting to me when you can write a character and put them in a situation where they can't do the things that are familiar. you wouldn't want to do that forever, obviously, because people come to the book and they read the book because they want to see those things. But when you have an opportunity, it's good to do it. And so in 13, I made him a soldier. He doesn't have wings. He doesn't fly. He doesn't have a mace, to any of those things. In 13, again, we did it with the Plague Doctor thing. And it was already at the printer. And that issue sat on the docks, I don't even know how long, while the entire comic book industry was shut down because of the pandemic, you know. So the fact that it came out when it did was just really, I don't know how you even describe it, you know, but complete coincidence, you know. But it's one of my favorite issues of the entire series. The artist that we worked with on that issue was phenomenal, and really captured, you know, the sort of horror kind of aspect, you know, because it goes on with Hawkman and his time and space and reincarnating all that. He's also a character that's suited to any genre, right? Like he's obviously suited to the superhero genre, but he could be in a war story, which is what we did in 13, and he could be in a horror story, which is what we did in 23, or he could be in a cosmic sci-fi story, which was what we did in 8 when he went to Krypton. You know, he's a character that's really the most versatile character in all of comics. So whatever the genre is, whatever the time is, whatever the place is, there's always a spot for Hawkman. And we tried to lean into that as much as we could.
Well, what do you think are the upsides, both as a writer and a fan, and what are the downsides to having a character who can fit into any era? Because, you know, if he's reincarnated time after time after time after time, then really you could put him anywhere. Mm-hmm. And so I'd be interested from the writing standpoint and from the standpoint of a longtime fan, what the upsides and downsides you see to that are.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a downside, you know, I see it as all upside, especially when you're operating in a universe like the DC universe. It's just this massive, you know, sprawling entity, cosmic and earthbound, that goes from, you know, I don't even know how far back in the past the DC universe goes, but goes all the way to the Legion of Superheroes, you know, and then in between you've got Commandy and Booster Gold, and, you know, there's just all these eras. So to have a character that isn't confined to just the here and now, I mean, there's literally no constraints put on Hawkman whatsoever. Anything you want to do with that character at any point in time, in any way, you can absolutely do. And I don't think a lot of series tapped into that as much as ours did. But, you know, Brian Hitch and I saw that as one of the tremendous assets of the character from the jump. And us leaning into that would be a way that maybe our series could differentiate itself from other series, but also dovetail with what we were trying to do in terms of cleaning up the continuity and making everything count. You know, because I went through that with Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern Corps, right? Like the John Stewart fans hate the Hal Jordan fans, and the Hal Jordan fans hate the Kyle Rayner fan. You know what I mean? It's like they all have this rivalry, good natured, not real hate, but they all have this rivalry between them, and nobody admits to being a Guy Gardner fan, right? You know, he's probably my favorite of the group, but I didn't want that to be that way with Hawkman. I didn't want it to be the Carter Hall fans and the Katar Hall fans, and there's this rivalry between them, you know? And it was a risk. When Brian and I did that first issue, we didn't know. People would have went, this is the dumbest idea ever. I can't believe they tried to say that they're the same guy. And we put it all out there in that first issue, like, we're either gonna have people jump on board with this, or we're gonna go down in flames, like right from the beginning, you know? And thankfully, I honestly don't know if a single person, I'm not saying they're not out there, but I honestly don't know if a single person was like, that's a terrible idea. I can't believe you did that. You know? So, I mean, that in and of itself is like, that's like finding a leprechaun riding a unicorn. You know what I mean? Like that never happens. So that in and of itself felt like such a tremendous win. And it just gave us so much inspiration and so much, you know, confidence to really go forward with what we were doing and take these big risks. And, you know, I couldn't be happier with how it all turned out.
So Tim, how does the multiplicity of lifetimes work for you in upsides and downsides as a fan?
Well, For me, there are no downsides. I mean, it's just like Robert said, just every few issues you get suddenly just a new life that we've never seen before. Issue number 13, where he was a soldier, this faraway planet, was one of the best issues of the series. The big first arc had ended at 12, and we were wondering where was he going to go from here, and is it going to kind of lag a bit and everything. And then issue 13 came out, and a lot of people have said this is one of their favorite issues of the whole series. It was a really touching, kind of made you emotional in a bit. It was a really, really good issue. And Hawkman has that ability, and just he can tap into so many things. I'll never forget the first time I was reading number one, and I came across that double spread with all his lives. I wish I could bottle that feeling I had and kind of feel it again, because I flipped out. I was like, what? And there were so many characters I knew and I didn't know, and who is this and who is this and who is this, and it was amazing. And I can see how Robert thought maybe they were taking a chance, but yeah, it was a stroke of genius, I think, of bringing that all together. Oh, and this is where we're taking Hawkman. And that one double spread explained it to me. Oh, oh, this is what we're going to do, and this is really exciting. And why isn't this a bi-weekly series? It's just once a month, which is not enough. But even with the plague issue, I remember when the solicitations for the issue came, I think it was January, and we were starting to hear some news about kind of the virus and everything. And slowly, when it was like a month before the issue was supposed to come out, and I used to post on Twitter all the time, next issue is this, and here's a variant cover and everything. And everybody would see this cover for issue number 23 and like, oh, is he tapping into this, pandemic that's happening? And later on, we I think Robert said that he wrote the story back in October of 2019 is when he wrote it. And
yeah, it was like October, November.
Yeah. And so, there's no connection there. It's just timing, but it was just perfect timing. Everybody just was wondering if Robert had some kind of, special ability to look into the future or something. But that was an amazing issue. And the way we were able to tie that in. And on the cover, I think it said the fever breaks. And it kind of gave you hope that this is going to go away, and we're going to get through this and stuff. And so it was a very uplifting issue in a really bad time, I think. So just so many different lives. A lot of people might say because of that he's confusing, which I don't think most people can't talk about Hawkman without saying he's confusing, but I think it just makes him a deeper and more interesting character for so many fans.
But you started Hawkworld long before this was integrated. So what inspired you to actually dive in and do that?
To start Hawkworld?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, well, it was back in end of 2015, and I was really starting getting back into comics then, and I was starting to look around, and I noticed a lot of superheroes had social media sites, Twitter accounts, and back then the Let's Talk Superman or Let's Talk Flash, those kind of accounts were really popular back then. And well, I want to do something with Hawkman, and so I started looking around Facebook, and there were some Hawkman groups, but I had so many ideas and stuff that I wanted to do, and I didn't want to like overrun somebody's group, so I decided to start my own. And it was just, I wanted, Hawkman didn't have a series at that time, and I wanted to talk about Hawkman with fellow Hawk fans. I thought if we could find 500 members, 500 friends who'd like to talk about Hawkman, that would be really, really great. And I had no idea it would take off the way it did, because after about 6 months, we had about over 3,000 members. And people like Tony Isabella and Rags Morales and Graham Nolan, all these people were joining the group as well, which was the ultimate compliment. And then Twitter took off, and then, well, I guess I'll start Instagram too. I started Instagram, and then I started working on a blog, and it just really snowballed, really. It's kind of become my main job, and I go to work for my day job, but but it's been fun, and I keep wondering when I'm going to run out of, I don't know, inspiration or energy to do it. I thought when the cancellation for the Hawkman series was announced, I thought I might just drop out, lose my energy for it, but it hasn't happened yet. I even kind of talked about that on Twitter and Facebook. Like, maybe I need to just kind of bow out for a while. And everybody, a lot of people, they were very kind and said, no, don't you dare, stay on, and there's still, a good fan base for Hawkman. And I don't know how long this will continue, but it's been great meeting all the fans and all the creators of Hawkman. And I still can't believe I'm sitting here in a Zoom chat with Robert Venditti, but here I am. So we'll see how far it goes.
Well, speaking of fandom, Robert, what have been your experiences with Hawk fans?
They've been really positive, yeah. It's not always that way, you know what I mean? There's always unfair quarterbacks, but I don't know what it is about Hawkman. I don't know if, they're maybe conditioned to just be grateful for what they have, you know what I mean? Because there's not always a Hawkman series and things are always getting canceled and whatever, but there are a ton of hugely passionate Hawkman and Hawkwoman fans out there. And I think the only sort of negative stuff was in the beginning when people were disappointed that Hawkwoman wasn't a part of the series and they thought that it was my decision to do that, and all those kinds of things. But since Hawkwoman joined the series for the last 10 issues, those fans have all been enormously positive as well, and so it's really, from the first issue, it's been almost uniformly positive, which I don't know that it's ever happened. I don't doubt it'll ever happen again. It's super rare, but I remember when that first issue came out and we got to that double page spread, and he says in his journal, I haven't just been reincarnating across time, ... I've been reincarnating across time, ... in space or whatever. I think that's how it goes. I don't have it in front of me, but he does say time and space. I had so many people just, they were like stunned, they're like, all it took was to add and space and it fixed the entire thing, and I think that really just kind of, in a positive way, just caught people off guard. Like, holy cow, like I didn't know 2 words could do that, and so I think it won a lot of people over from the jump, and really got them invested in the series and had them buy in, and it stayed positive all the way through, all the way through, all the way up until the cancellation, in the last issue, all the stuff that I've seen about it. And I'm sure there's stuff out there that's negative. I don't doubt that there is. But as far as anything that people have said to me directly on Twitter, or reviews that people send me, or podcasts or things like that, they're all very, very positive. And that's just a great feeling, because this is a character that's been around for 80 years, has a ton of fans. The character's really been through the ringer in a lot of ways over the years with some of the things that have happened with him. And so to be able to do what I think looking back on it, I can say is put a lasting stamp on the character like we did. Is not an opportunity that you get often with characters that have been around that long, because there's been so many stamps already put on them. So I'm very grateful to have done that, and I don't know if it'll happen with any other characters that I do. It's always the goal, but um, you know, I've got one at least, so I'm happy about that.
Well, one of the things that makes superheroes fun sometimes, especially the more human superheroes, is gadgets. Batman has all of his cool stuff. Green Lantern has the ring that lets him do so many different things. And the Hawks have wings and maces made of nth metal. And I would like to know what both of you think is the most interesting aspect of those nth metal bits of gear, I guess I'd say.
For me, one of the things we introduced in the series is that the hammer comes back to, I mean, the hammer, the mace comes back to his hand. And I like that. I used it maybe too much in the series, because it was always so fun to, have him call the mace to his hand and have it hit something along the way or whatever, so that's probably my favorite aspect of it. But the most important aspect would definitely be the flight aspect of it, that the nth metal gives them the powers to fly. And, thankfully, the artists we worked with throughout the series, from Brian Hitch all the way up to Fernando Passarin at the end, who is just a phenomenal talent. And I felt so fortunate to have him join the series and close us out, because he's very much like Brian Hitch in the sense that not only can you give Fernando and Brian anything and know no matter what it is, they're going to draw it and they're going to draw it well, but they actually want you to do that. Like, Brian Hitch's, he actually wants you to say a double page spread with as many Hawkmen as you can fit, and each one has a different costume design. And he's like, cool, And Fernando's the same way. When Fernando got to do Hawkwoman's 2 pages that, we had to wait 20 something issues for before we finally got to do it. But when he did the page, was so into it, and you can see it there. You can see it in the finished product. So both of them, all the artists we have in the series, really leaned into the idea of flight, and not just having the characters flying, but really thinking about how these wings would power them, how they would use them in a fight. The bird motion kind of swooping, and winged flight is a very violent thing. Like, the fastest animals on the planet are birds, and they dive bomb at such a tremendous speed, like a bullet, that they'll hit another bird and like break its back in midair. Like, it's a really savage property. And so we wanted to lean into that aspect of it, because wings have this 2 sides to them that can be very graceful, but they can also be used in combat to great effect. And so that would be the most important aspect to the character of the nth metal, would be the flying.
Tim, what about from a fandom perspective?
Well, in Robert's series, it was just all about the wings and the mace. And in the first issue, it was kind of subtle, but Hawkman just had like a rod on his belt. And when the giant Wingor came flying after him, he grabbed that, and suddenly it became a mace. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever, because I'll admit in the past, I've seen them in pictures, they're walking around with the mace hanging down from their belt. And I'm like, well, doesn't that like always hit them in the leg? And, and isn't that painful? And do you really want to carry that heavy thing around all day long? And I think even in a JSA issue, Jay Garrick Flash said that to Hawkman one time. Do you really have to carry that thing around with you all the time? And the way Robert and Brian Hitch did that was just really cool, like a lightsaber mace kind of thing. And it was a really good aspect of the new mace. And then in issue number 3, when it came flying back to him, that was, why didn't people do this before? I mean, we got this guy high up in the sky with the mace, and if he drops it, that's the end of it. And he's got this connection to the nth metal. It just makes perfect sense. And finally, you know, it's like I didn't realize how badly I had wanted it until I saw it in issue number 3, and it was just perfect for Hawkman. And then the other thing was the wings. And the first time I read the issue, I didn't realize it, but in issue number 1, where Hawkman goes diving into a small tunnel to get into a cave, and his wings contract and disappear. And when he drops into the cave, then he spreads his wings out again. And I really didn't, I don't know why I didn't notice that when it first happened. But then later on, I was reading it again. Oh, he can do this now. It's just the wings just come out and go in. He can control them as he's flying. And it's like, for a hero who has, you know, not just up in the sky, but, you know, go into caves and other places and into rooms, that's just like the perfect thing ever. And in issue number 4, he's explaining it to Qatar Hall, where, you know, when your wings keep hitting the door jam, you'll start wanting to get your wings to contract like mine do, or something like that. It was really, really cool that Robert and Brian Hitch brought that into the series. Hawkman is had so many weapons in the past. He's had, you know, the Qatar arm blade. He's just armed to the teeth at times. He's got that claw of Horus. Didn't show up in this series, but he's just got all these different weapons. But I really think I liked how Robert just focused on the mace, because that's Hawkman's iconic weapon. And instead of bringing all these other weapons in, he's focused on establishing the mythology of the mace. And that's one of the best things in the series, I think.
Yeah, a couple things I'll say in there. So the lightsaber mace, that was all Brian, you know, just him being the absolutely fantastic designer and visual thinker that he is. For the same reasons Tim said, it was like, you can't just have this mace banging against his hip all the time, you know, like, where does it go when he puts on a suit or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like, does he carry it in a briefcase, you know? And so that was his idea, to make it, the head sort of disappear and reappear. And I also, you know, you write all these things and you end up deleting them before they even go to an editor, you know, you're in the moment, you're just writing. But I did write a moment in the series when he sticks the handle in a bad guy's mouth and makes the head appear and blows his head apart. But I was like, nah, I don't do that. I deleted that out of the script before it even went to the editor. I mean, I knew it would never get past it.
I would have liked to see that.
You know, that's not what this version of Carter Hall would do. It's way too violent.
Maybe Cher would do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but as far as, you know, going back to the original sort of concept of the character all the way in the Golden Age, you know, I forget the exact phrasing, Tim, you'll probably know it, but he's like a hero of today who fights with the weapons of the past or whatever. And he would always grab something off the museum wall and go fight with it, you know, and he always had these different weapons. I wanted him to just have the mace, but I also understood that he would have to have a range weapon, you know, he would have to have a ranged weapon in order to be really effective, particularly in flight. So throwing the mace and having it come back to him, he can essentially use the mace like a bow and arrow now. And so he has a melee weapon up close, but he also has a ranged weapon. And that would kind of make him that total package. And then, like Tim said, you don't have to worry about, you know, he drops the mace, and now he can't get his mace back. And you got to write into the story about how he's got to go fly down and pick up his mace. And that's all eating up story time or whatever. So to just have the mace come back to the hand felt like it was a easy solution to do a lot of things that we need to do. And then he would never need to use a gun or a bow and arrow or any of these things that he'd used at other points, you know, in the series or in his character's series.
Well, I'd like to know for each of you, what were the really high points of this Hawkman run? We've talked a little bit about that, but it'd be nice to have a summary.
Gosh, It's hard to say. I'm really proud of so much of it. I don't know if I had to pick like a very favorite thing. I don't know if I could say, but one thing that Superman has always been my favorite superhero because of Christopher Reeve Superman when I was a kid. And so the idea that we were able to introduce a Kryptonian version of Hawkman and to make that a part of Krypton's mythology was just a huge thing for me. But I think of all the things I'll look back on the most and be most proud of, as a writer, it'll be the fact that we fixed, continuity to where people can't say Hawkman's confusing anymore. I mean, they will say it, of course, but it's no longer true. Everybody gets it. And the moment that I knew that everybody got it is my son was probably 10 at the time, I guess. And I had him read like the first 6 issues because he was like, "Oh, Dad, what are these?" And I was like, "Oh, read them." And I was like, "Oh, this could be a good experiment." And so he read them, and I was like, after he read them, I said, "Tell me what happened." And he could tell me every single thing about Hawkman and why he did what he did and what his motivations were. He read the first 7 issues, so he read the part where we introduced the new origin for the character as well, which is another one of my favorite issues of the series. And he could tell me everything about the character, and none of it was confusing at all. I was like, there it is. It's so easy that like a 10-year-old can understand Hawkman now. And so I think that's the thing that I'll always look back on and kind of be proudest of.
Tim, high points for you?
I would probably have three. One was what Robert just mentioned, how he was able to just tie everything in together. The fact that Robert even thought of trying to establish a new origin was pretty gutsy, I think. And but it worked. It made sense. And when you look back at everything that's happened in the past, that one new origin, the new foundation for Hawkman, everything is on there now, and it just makes sense. And that was the biggest, one of the biggest things. The second one was making not Hawkman but Carter Hall a more relatable character. The other series like Superman and Clark Kent, or Batman and Bruce Wayne, their other identity is like half of the story. And I think it's really important to not just build up the superhero, but build up the man as well. And we were able to see more of Carter Hall than I think we've had in a long time, with his friendships, his friendship with Adam, his friend network that he seemed to have all over the world, where he had these people in Kenya and Indonesia and Greece and London, and all these friends that he had, and they all knew him and were familiar with him. And that aspect of Hawkman. And in the issue number 2, where he goes to a museum and he's known as Dr. Carter Hall. Apparently, he's a very famous archaeologist as well. So that part was really important for me. I think it made Carter Hall an important character as well. And then the third one will have to be the relationship that he reestablished with Hawkman and Hawkwoman, because it's been so long since we've seen these two as a real couple. Maybe since in the Hawkworld series, they kind of became a couple, and then they broke up. And before that, it would have to be the Hawkman series by Tony Isabella back in the mid '80s. So it's been like almost 30 years since we've really seen them as a really solid, unwavering couple. And those three things were the most precious things for me from the series, I think.
Well, I've covered pretty much everything that I had down to talk about. Is there anything that either one of you would like to add?
you got any questions for me, Tim, shout them out. I'll tell you whatever you want to know.
There is one thing I want to know. In the last issue on Hawkman's desk, there's a snow globe.
Mhm.
What is that snow globe? What does it signify? It's just
Yeah,
so out of place.
yeah. Fernando drew it in there. He just wanted to draw it in there. I
Okay.
don't know if anybody noticed, but he
Yeah.
also drew Hawkman missing a finger on his writing hand. So that's like another injury that he sustained over the years, you know?
Yeah, I've noticed all the scars. I didn't notice that one. I have to look at it again. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so happy with how those last 5 pages came out. I knew what the last 5 pages of the series were going to be a very, very long time ago. I just didn't know what happened, you know? Is it going to happen in issue 29? Is it going to happen at 36? Whatever it happened, I knew what those last 5 pages were going to be. And to be able to do those was amazing. You know, you never know if a publisher or an editor is going to let you do those kinds of things with characters. But
What you did in issue number 26 when they were finally free from reincarnation, and the god entity told them that their years would seem like days, or was it the other way around? Their years would seem like days.
yeah, yeah.
And that was sneaky. I didn't catch that the first time, and a lot of other fans on Twitter and Facebook said the same thing.
Yeah, I was gonna
That
say I might have made it too sneaky because a lot of people were like, "How come they live forever now or whatever?" It doesn't make any sense. And I was like, "Well, actually, it's coming over here, you know."
yeah,
Um, but
it
yeah,
was
that opens up the characters now. I always hope as a writer that I add more toys to the toy box when I'm done, right? So that the next person can come along and use some of the things that I added because everything that I used was somebody else's toy. You know, like I used Gardner Fox's toys, and I used Ray Palmer, and I used Adam Strange, and I used all these different things. So I want to leave some toys behind that somebody else can use rather than just take. You know,
yeah.
and the whole series. Another thing I tried to do. I really wanted the whole series to be a tribute to Gardner Fox, like as many Gardner Fox concepts as I could get into the series. I got in there, like whether it was the concept of Earth 3 or, the JSA, the relationship with Ray Palmer, the relationship with Adam Strange, like all these things I want to try to get in there, just really give Gardner Fox his due because, I mean, just what a creative force for comics, but I don't think is recognized maybe in the same way other creators are sometimes, But um, yeah, so I always knew what the last 5 pages were going to be, and DC and my editor, uh, Andrea Shea, at the end of the series, was so supportive and to let us do an ending like that was super cool. So.
Well, so Robert, what's next?
I am working on some things, but none of them have been announced yet. So I don't know that I can say other than I am going to be doing that idea. Doing a series with doing some other things for DC too, but they haven't been announced yet. So I can't really talk about them yet. But I want to say that December is going to be the first time in like a really, really long time that I'm not going to have a DC comic book come out that month, but I'm definitely writing some stuff. It's just, they haven't been announced, but they'll be announced very soon. So.
And Tim, are you just now finishing up your 10 days of Hawkman celebration?
Yeah, it ended on Friday. So 11 days of Hawkman Day.
And so do you have plans going forward, or are you kind of waiting to see how things shake out for Hawkworld?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say right now. Somebody asked me on Facebook, what are we going to do now? And I said, well, we'll just do what we were doing before the series started. Talk about past series, talk about things we wish we'd like to see in the future, share our favorite art and our ideas with Hawkman, And there's some amazing members and followers on Facebook and Twitter that just, they have a lot of great ideas, a lot of great opinions, and it's really fun to read through those every day. So I guess I'll just wait and see what they do with Hawkman next. It might be next year, it might be 5 years from now, I don't know. But I hope that DC will see the potential in the character and either put them in a team book somewhere, Hawkman and Hawkwoman together, or maybe they can pick it up where Robert left off with the Hawkman and Hawkwoman series. That would be really fantastic. We'll just have to wait and see, I guess.
Now, do either of you have a URL or other social media information you'd like to share?
I'm just at Robert Venditti on both Twitter and Instagram. So you can always get me there. And I'm happy to talk about Hawkman. Anyone to reach out to me on those channels, I'll be happy to answer your questions about stuff. And there's also the film, the Black Adam film that will be coming out. So that'll be exciting. You never know what something like that could do for the character in terms of visibility and, you know, potential for publishing initiatives and things. So I'm looking forward to whatever happens with Hawkman next. You know, I've spent my time with the character. Like I say, I hope I lift more toys in the toy box for the next people. And I hope that they pick some of those things up and play with them, because they are characters that are extremely adaptable and extremely versatile. And anybody who's a creator, I can't imagine a character that would allow you to do as many different things as Hawkman and Hawkwoman let you do.
Tim, do you have a URL to share?
Yeah, on Twitter, I'm Hawkworld _ on Facebook, look under Hawkworld. Instagram also, Hawkworld _ and also I have my own blog called Hawkworld. It's just put in Fly to Hawkworld and I think it'll come up. I've got those 4 going right now. So if you want to check them out, yeah, we'll always happy to find new Hawkman fans. So everybody's welcome.
Well, thank you both for joining me this evening. I really appreciate it. And I'd also like to thank everyone who's watched along with us and enjoyed the panel. And finally, thanks to our sponsors, Heroes Aren't Hard to Find, and its annual Heroes Convention.